The following disclaimer is for those in California only. Pursuant to California Assembly Bill 2571, it is illegal for the advertisement and or marketing of any firearm-related products and or programs in a manner that is designed, intended, or reasonably appears to be attractive to minors. As such, if you are currently in California, this program is restricted to only those that are over 18. Please turn this program off now if you are in California and under 18. Now, on to the program. Hello and welcome to the centertenspodcast. Centertens is a podcast that discusses small bore and precision air rifle from junior shooting sports on up to NCAA collegiate and Olympic competition. And now here's your host, Adam Pearson. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Centertens. This weekend marks the beginning of the spring season for NCAA competitions, and we had 8 matches over the course of 3 days. So we'll look at those matches, and then we'll also look at where the current standings are for the NCAA championships coming up. So the first match we're going to look at was held at Jacksonville State. Citadel traveled down there to compete, and Jacksonville edged out the Citadel 46-67 to 46-02. Jacksonville had a 22-98 in small bore and a 23-69 air to the Citadel's 22-80 small bore and 23-22 air. The top shooters for Jacksonville State, we had Franz Rasmussen with an aggregate of 1172, and the top shooter for the Citadel was James Hart IV with an 1177. Jacksonville's scoring team for small bore, you had Franz Rasmussen with a 579, Lars Lillinge with a 574, as well as Clark McWhorter with a 574, and Kim Jettenberg rounded it out with a 571. In air, Sam Burrow had a 595, Franz Rasmussen had a 593, Lars Lillinge a 591, and Annie Iannotti with a 590. For the Citadel, in small bore, you had James Hart IV with a 587, Carson Wood with a 574, Charlotte Welsh with a 570, and Daniel Shapiro with a 549. Their air team was James Hart IV with a 590, Charlotte Welsh with a 585, Carson Wood with a 574, and Dalton Bonite with a 573. Next match, we had Alabama-Birmingham traveling down to Wofford. Alabama edged that one out with a 45-80 to Wofford's 44-12. Alabama-Birmingham had a 22-51 small bore and a 23-29 air to Wofford's 21-70 small bore and 22-42 air. Alabama-Birmingham, they had quite a few different program records. We'll go over those once we go over the scores. But their top shooters was Brent Ling. He had an 1149 aggregate, or that was a personal record. And Wofford's top shooter was Garrett Dahl with an 1128. Alabama-Birmingham, their small bore team, Amy Cohan with a 568. Brent Ling with a personal record of 565. Christopher Comstock with a personal record of a 561. And Megan McLaughlin with a 557. In air, Christopher Comstock had a personal record of a 585. Brent Ling, a personal record with a 584. Gracie Turk with a 581. And Megan McLaughlin with a 579. For Wofford, their small bore team was Garrett Dahl with a 556. Ainsley Brooks Springer with a 548. Chanson Bullard with a 540. And Charlie Yang with a 526. Their air team, Garrett Dahl with a 572, Chanson Bullard with a 565, Ainsley Brooks Springer had a 559, Charlie Yang rounded it out with a 546. The third match was Kentucky and Army. Kentucky traveled up to West Point. Kentucky had a 47-32 to Army's 46-90. Kentucky's score was a 23-48 small bore to a 23-84 air. Army had a 23-28 small bore and a 23-62 air. Top shooter for Kentucky was Sophia Cicerello with an 1188. And Army's top shooter was Chris Jennings with 1175. Scoring teams for Kentucky, Sophia Cicerello with a 591. Jaden Thompson with a 588, Braden Pizer with a 587, and Martin Voss with a 582. Their air team was Emmy Sellers with a 598, Sophia Cicerello with a 597, Braden Pizer with a 596, and Allison Buessler with a 593. Army scoring teams, and Kyle Cutts with a 587, Anusha Packham with a 583. Then we had a pair of 579s from Ashton Arlington and Briggs Moore. Their air team, Briggs Moore had a 595, Anusha Packham with a 592, Ashton Arlington with a 588, and Kyle Cutts with a 587. The fourth match of the weekend was Georgia Southern traveling to Murray State. Georgia Southern set a program aggregate record of 47-31 to Murray State's 46-91. Georgia Southern had two program records in small bore. They had a 23-49 and a program record of 23-82 in air to Murray State's 23-19 small bore and 23-72 air. Top shooters was Emma Pullman for Georgia Southern with an 11.87, and for Murray State, Matthias Kiro had 11.81. The scoring teams, Georgia Southern small bore was Emma Pullman with a 5.92, Ella Goldfaden with a 5.87, then had a pair of 5.85s from Addie Burrow and Zahara Gonzalez-Mezo. And then in their air rifle team, Ella Goldfaden had a 5.97. Then we had three 5.95s. You have one from Bremen Butler, one from Emma Pullman, and one from Zahara Gonzalez-Mezo. Then for Murray State, their scoring team, Matthias Kiru had a 5.87 small bore, Allison Henry had a 5.82, Scott Patterson with a 5.78, and John Blanton with a 5.72. Their air team was Allison Henry with a 5.96, Matthias Kiru with a 5.94, and a pair of 5.91s from Alok Horder and John Blanton. Moving on to the matches on Sunday. Match number 5, we saw Georgia Southern competing against UT Martin, still at Murray State. Georgia Southern again set some program records. They set a program record aggregate of 47-38 to UT Martin's 46-17. Georgia Southern broke their small bore and air records again for the second day with a 23-49 small bore and a 23-89 air to UT Martin's 22-85 small bore and 23-32 air. The top shooters for Georgia Southern, we had a tie at 11.87 from both Ella Goldfaden and Emma Pullman. And the top shooter for UT Martin was Elena Walther with 11.70. The scoring teams for Georgia Southern in small bore, we had Ella Goldfaden with a 5.89, Emma Pullman with a 5.88, Bremen Butler with a 5.87, and Addie Burrow with a 5.85. In air, Emma Pullman set a personal record with a 5.99, then Ella Goldfaden with a 5.98, Addie Burrow with a 5.97, and Zahara Gonzalez-Mezo with a 5.95. UT Martin scoring team, we had Elena Walther with a 5.78 small bore, Nicholas Fairs with a 5.75, Joseph Kovac with a 5.69, and Jesse Chamberlain with a 5.63. In air, we had Elena Walther with a 5.92, Joseph Kovac with a 5.86, and we had a pair of 5.77s from Aubrey Summers and Nicholas Fairs. Next match on Sunday, match number 6, we saw Kentucky versus Nebraska at West Point. Kentucky edged out Nebraska with a 47-23 aggregate against Nebraska's 46-96. Kentucky had a 23-38 small bore and an air of 23-85. Nebraska had a 23-32 small bore and a 23-64 air. Top shooters for Kentucky, we had a Sophia Cicerello with an 11.84. And for Nebraska, it was Emma Rhodes with an 11.81. The scoring teams for Kentucky, in small bore, we had Sophia Cicerello with a 5.89. Then we had 5.84s from both Emmy Sellers and Jane Thompson. Braden Pizer rounded it out with a 5.81. And then for air, Allison Buessler had a 5.98. Emmy Sellers with a 5.97. Then we had a pair of 5.95s from Sophia Cicerello and Martin Voss. Nebraska scoring teams for small bore, we had Emma Rode with a 5.87. Mackenzie Strouch with a 5.85, Madeline Erickson with a 5.81, and Cecilia Aussie with a 5.79. Their air team was Emma Rode with a 5.94, Cecilia Aussie with a 5.92, Mackenzie Strouch with a 591, and Charlotte Mick with a 587. Match number 7 on the weekend, we saw 3 teams at TCU. Ohio State and Air Force both traveled down to TCU to compete. TCU topped that match with a 47-36 aggregate to Air Force's 47-08 and Ohio State's 46-99. TCU had a 23-52 small bore and a 23-84 air. Air Forces had a 23-35 small bore and a 23-73 air. And Ohio State had a 23-29 small bore and a 23-70 air. The top shooters for this match, for TCU, we had a tie with Stephanie Grunso and Katie Zahn, both with 1189s. Air Force had Morgan Krebs with an 1182, and Victor Kiss for Ohio State with an 1188. The scoring teams, for TCU small bore, we had Stephanie Grunso with a 591, as well as Katie Zahn with a 591. Then we had a pair of 585s from Janie Haverhill and Nicole Hogan. In air, we had a pair of 598s from Katie Zahn and Stephanie Grunso. Then we had a pair of 594s from Jeannie Haverhill and Stephanie Allen. Air Force's scoring team, we have Morgan Krebs with a 588, Scott Rocket with a 585, and Panaya D'Souza and Lauren Hurley both with 581s. In air, Panaya D'Souza topped it with a 596, then Morgan Krebs with a 594, Lauren Hurley with a 593, and Victoria Leverett with a 590. For Ohio State, their small bore team, we had Victor Kiss with a 592, Derek Kaiser with a 584, Lillian Warren with a 578, and Adrian Hansen with a 575. The air team, we had Victor Kiss with a 596. Then we had a pair of 594s from Derek Kaiser and Paige Hollowell, and a 586 from John Hamilton. The last match of the weekend was actually just finished up as I'm recording this. It was Ohio State against TCU at TCU. TCU topped that match with a 47-30 aggregate to Ohio State's 47-15. TCU had a small bore score of 23-47 and an air score of 23-83 to Ohio State's 23-37 small bore and 23-78 air. Top shooters for this match was Katie Zahn with an 1191 and Victor Kiss for Ohio State with an 1184. Scoring teams, small bore for TCU, we had Katie Zahn with a 596, Stephanie Grunso with a 587, then we had a pair of 582s from Nicole Hogan and Jeannie Haverhill. In air, Stephanie Grunso had a 598, then we had 3 595s. You had Jeannie Haverhill, Nicole Hogan, and Katie Zahn, all with 595s. For Ohio State, small bore was Victor Kiss with a 590, Derek Kaiser with a 584, Lillian Warren with a 582, and Adrian Hansen with a 581. The air team was Lillian Warren with a 596, Derek Kaiser with a 595, Victor Kiss with a 594, and Adrian Hansen with a 593. So that was the 8 matches for this weekend. And we saw a little movement on NCAA's, the qualifiers. So looking at the top teams that are still in standings for the NCAA championships, you still have the same teams sitting in 1 through 3, West Virginia, TCU, and Kentucky. Alaska was still sitting in 4th. Then we had a switch at 5 and 6. Georgia Southern moved up to 5 as Ole Miss dropped down to 6. Then Nebraska and Air Force remained at 7 and 8. And sitting just outside on the bubble, we had Ohio State sitting there at 9th and Murray State sitting at 10th. So those are the teams that are right now set up for team selections to go to the NCAA champions, but there's still a few more matches where we could see a little bit of movement. So the matches we have coming up this weekend, on Saturday, we've got Alaska Fairbanks traveling to Navy. We've got Army traveling to West Virginia. Morehead State and Ole Miss traveling to Akron. Georgia Southern heading to Nebraska. Alabama Birmingham heading to UT Martin. VMI heading to Wofford. And Air Force heading to the Citadel. And then on Sunday, got another match between Air Force and Citadel at the Citadel. Another match between Alaska Fairbanks and Navy. You got Memphis heading to UT Martin. got another match against Ohio State and TCU, but this one is at Ohio State. And then North Georgia and Army competing at WVU. So got quite a few matches coming up that we could see some changes in those standings again. So we'll have to wait and see next Monday to see what happens. So that'll be it for this week. And like we like to say every week, the most important shot is the one that is in front of you. Thank you for listening to Season 1 of Center Tens. If you like the show, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast and Spotify. This helps out tremendously. Give us a follow on Instagram and Facebook at Center Tens. Center Tens can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Buzzsprout, Pocket Cast, and at centertens.com. Hope you join us for our next episode.